Swami and I are going to give you a chant, a short Sanskrit sloka that it's about our parampara. We put great emphasis on parampara. That's the lineage, spiritual lineage of gurus, which in India had this genius idea to transmit the power mystically from one guru to the next, to the next, to the next. And they did it with initiatory shakti of various kinds. Unlike the Pope who gets elected by a vote, right? So that's the Western way of choosing a leader. But in India's genius said, no. Only the guru knows who the next guru is and can empower that soul with the power that he was given by his guru. And in that way, it passes down and then it perpetuates, it never stops. That's the idea. So this chant speaks of the 8 gurus, the most recent gurus of our tradition, the 8 most important ones. And we've lost track, actually, quite a few of them historically, because our site of Siddhanta lineage goes back about 2,200 years, and India in those days wasn't really good about recording history. They just lived history and didn't pay attention to writing it all down as we do in the West quite so much. Nowadays it's a little bit better. So these are 8 gurus, and we want to bring their consciousness, their high illumined consciousness into our meeting together.
Om Sadashiva Samarambham Nandinatha Sunanditam Tirumulara Siddhanta Tejo Rashmi Prakashitam Rishi Punita Maunapta Rasannasyam Dadojvalam Tegait Swami Adbhutascarya Siddhi Samarya Bhushitam Charlapa Swami Samridam Yoga Swami Subhashitam Dukkha Vinashanim Sadhya Arananda Bradayanim Varditam Gurugir Loke Sujeshneha Samanditaye Sadhanair Gurudevasya Shiva Sammargaminaha Sampratam Bodhinatena Sotsahama Birakshitam Divyena Bhavato Nityam Vande Guru Paramparam.
So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about karma management, because karma is such a beast and we need tools to manage it. And Swami's going to share some Gurudeva's profound teachings. And then I'm going to take you on a little visual tour, show you a few of the things that we're doing, the monks are doing, and my team specifically is doing. You'll hear more about that in a few minutes. So I'm going to invite Tilananda Swami to share some ideas from Gurudeva's teachings.
Om Shiklan Bardharam Vishnam Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavaradam Dhyayet Sarva Bhima Prashantaye. Om Shivaya. Hello everyone. Well, we have such a varied group, and I'm not really sure what all your backgrounds are.
They must have been good because it brought us all together.
Yeah, exactly. That's the great thing about Hinduism, it's so varied, and there's a lot of different ways to look at truth. So that's the beautiful thing about the idea of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal path, right, the eternal way, is that early on it was recognized that there's so many different ways of trying to find whatever that truth is. And so that's why there wasn't any official religion of India initially. It's just all these paths, and it's this eternal path towards truth. So, with all those many different ways of looking at it, I'm going to present some of the ways that Gurudeva Sivaya Subramaniya Swami and our Guru Parampara have for looking at our own mind. So, it's interesting how in Western context you often have a search for truth outside of yourself. You know, you look off into the stars, you look into a microscope, you look into an atom, but all the while, anything you find is processed through this person, right? So that's why there's a famous, we did an article on Newsroom today, there's a famous exchange between Rabindranath Tagore and Einstein where Tagore is just saying, whatever you do, it's a human universe. You can't take away the observer from your findings. So, this study we're looking at, this actually comes from it's not a study, it's a letter that Gurudeva wrote to some of his yoga students back in the day, which we're looking at maybe late 70s, early 80s. And it's an interesting insight into our how we interact with the world around us, and sort of a mystical law that you can use in your own life to better control your own life. But we have to lay some groundwork first, again, because I'm not sure how many of you are actually familiar with the large quantity of our specific teachings. So first, we're going to start with a look at how we view our reality, and Gurudeva categorizes this in his 7 dimensions of the mind. So we're not talking about physical, scientific dimensions, you know, third dimensional reality, fourth dimensional reality, etc. We're talking about the dimensions by which you view the universe around you. They also loosely correspond to the chakras. To start though, I like to start with the second dimension because it's just the easiest to understand. So the second dimension in this study is the physical world around us. Anything you can feel and see and touch and hear and taste. And within that world is the first dimension. So again, you have to think of these dimensions as your awareness as a source in the center of your mind, and as it comes out, you're going further and further into the outer world. So the first dimension is kind of as deep as you can get in the outer world. It's actually behind what you're seeing in the outer world. So it's as simple as if you look into a wall, you'll see sheetrock and studs and electrical. But then you can keep going into the first dimension, deeper into the molecules in that wall, into the atoms of those molecules, and into those atoms themselves. So they actually start to enter into the higher dimensions by going deep enough into that first dimension. So it all loops in on itself. So the second dimension, the physical world, relates closely to the third dimension. The third dimension of the mind, of your consciousness, is your or anyone's interaction, energetic interaction between people and people and their things. So the floor is of the second dimension, and you observing the floor and your reactions to it are the third dimension. So I like this bright color, and I like that the floor is final because it's waterproof, because I spilled it, I drank on it earlier. And that's my third dimension, my third dimensional experience. The most crude form, not the most crude, but a crude form of the third dimension is your having an argument with somebody, and your stomach tightens. You're both upset at each other, and these forces aren't flowing, right? Those forces that you're feeling, that's the third dimension. And then that carries over somewhat to the fourth dimension. We're getting deeper and deeper in consciousness. The fourth dimension is simply our understanding of our own third dimension. So there are people that live entirely in the third dimension, and they never have self-reflection or observation. They just go from reaction to reaction to reaction. Life tumbles them around. And I'm sure you've seen some of these people before. There's a nice quote by Seneca I have here that the Stoic philosopher, he said, is the way you're living now really any different to being dead? And he's talking to people that are stuck in this third dimension, that never reflect on their own life and how they can change themselves to affect their life. So the fourth dimension is simply that first foray into your self-reflection. There's a good quote in here from Gurudeva's book, which you can read. It's online. It's called The 7 Dimensions of the Mind, and it goes into much more detail about all these dimensions. So this is actually a quote from the third dimensional section, but it touches on the fourth. The mature meditator remains independent of the fluctuating cycles of the mind and emotion by not identifying falsely with the inevitable changes inherent in the third dimensional existence. So you're actually disconnecting from something you might be reacting to just by observing your reaction. They work to hold awareness constantly in the fourth dimension, from which the first, second, and third are viewed in affectionate detachment. The fourth dimension is home base, the area of the mind one returns to after meditation, not allowing awareness to flow into the externalities of gross instinct and intellect found in the third dimension. One of the first things you can do to maintain a perspective that deals positively with the forces of the third dimension is to study your own karmic cycles. So you study your own mental states, your emotions, your reactions, and how long you stay in them, as well as studying how you get there. And that in itself is the most rudimentary form of the fourth dimension, self-reflection. So in theory, most people here actually live in the fourth dimension a lot of the time because you're at a gathering like this and you're listening to Swamis talk about stuff. So briefly, to touch on the other dimensions, even though they're not important for this letter I'm going to read later. The fifth dimension is you observing the totality of life, the larger pattern and perfection of everything. So there was a question earlier about the state of the world right now. Why is that the way it is, right? So in zooming out, you can see, of course, that human existence has always gone through cycles of good and bad, of growth and disintegration, etc. So that's one way of you looking at the totality, and that's utilizing the fifth dimension, which is related to the fifth chakra, in order to do that. It's doing that. Being in the fifth dimension can also generate a feeling of bliss, which can be perceived as inner light and refined inner sounds. So the fifth dimension is, or can be, a very meditative, deep, mystical state. But the lower forms of it can be experienced by anybody. Seeing yourself as one with everything rather than just a person. That's very much a fifth dimensional experience. And those who meditate often will often have insights from this dimension, but those insights are not easily translated to thought or language. A lot of your, an interesting reflection is that a lot of your thoughts are confined to the languages you speak. So, what's your mind without language? Something to reflect on. So, Meditations here, right, not often translated thought, it's the resting place of Savikalpa Samadhi, which you might have heard of. Savikalpa Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, these deep meditative realizations. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the highest, it's the self-realization, kind of the beyond enlightenment state that monastics, renunciates are seeking. And then Savikalpa Samadhi, is the lower one, is in the fifth dimension, and it's essentially the experience of oneself as everything of love, consciousness, bliss, light, Satchidananda, right? So entering this dimension has a really powerful effect on the subconscious, and that can clarify the subconscious, which allows your intuition to flow through it easier. So the repeated fifth dimensional experiences in meditation or partially in daily life have a wonderful lasting effect on the subconscious, which is great for spiritual growth. Another example of a lower fifth dimensional experience, just so you know if you've touched into it, is elation. If you've ever felt totally elated by something, and it's almost like there's this good feeling that comes up into your throat a little, right? Because it's touching into the pranas are touching into your fifth chakra. And then another would be observing something so vast and beautiful that you have a moment of awe, right? So you might see something like an astronaut in space observing the Earth for the first time as a whole beautiful, fragile orb in this infinite nothingness. That moment, your brain actually can't process everything it's seeing, and it has to instantly create a bunch of synapses to be able to take in what it is. So that moment is a bit of a fifth dimensional experience, and it's the same thing that occurs in very deep meditations. Somebody's expanded their awareness so much that it creates this same feeling. So imagine if you were able to do that continuously day in and day out in your meditations, what that would do to a person's mind. So the sixth dimension, that is the, good way to describe it. It's a realm of subtle inner sounds and form, usually geometric form, and subtle forms of light. And it's kind of like the code the universe is written in. So if you have a computer, somebody who is not in touch with the part of their awareness that is in the sixth dimension, they can use the programs of the computer in the outer world, right? But they can't do much more than that. Whereas if you have a coder come along, somebody who can understands the sixth dimension, their awareness can go into it, that person almost has a bit of a more subtle control over their life and their reality. So the sixth dimension is just the ones and zeros, but it's not cold and mechanical. It's this deep profundity, and it's kind of like the event horizon on a black hole, where all the stars and solar systems and all this stuff are and galaxies even are collapsing into a supermassive black hole, and on the edge of the black hole is this intensity of light, and then it just flips into the void, right? So the void is the seventh dimension. It's past that event horizon. It's the seventh chakra above. And then space and time stretching out into infinity and nothingness, the perception of which is based on how your awareness is looking at it. By that we mean that awareness, I should explain awareness a little bit, because it's important to understand this concept that in our way of looking at our teachings, what we call the Shum perspective, based on our language of meditation, Gurudeva, is opposite of the Western idea, where you hear all the time, oh, I have thoughts in my head, I'm thinking this thought passed through my mind, this feeling passed through my mind. true perspective is that all existence is finished and complete. All things that have existed or will exist already exist simultaneously, and all iterations of those things through time, all points in time exist already. And through this massive grid work of time and space, your point of awareness is traveling through it like a flashlight, looking over frames of existence. So right now, even a good way to understand it is you hold up your hand. Hold up your hand. Now look at the floor behind your hand. And then look at your hand. And then look at the tip of your nose. And then close your eyes and look at the back of your eyelids. So what you've just done is you've taken this awareness, like a flashlight, and you've drawn it back in towards itself. So in meditation, you're doing that, but you keep going. Which can be a little challenging. It's easy to do if you have a physical object you're looking at, but once you get inside your own head, there's not really physical landmarks, but you can keep drawing it back towards itself. Because all you're trying to find out is, what's the source that it's coming from? Who am I? So in seventh dimension, this infinite space, awareness just expands really fast, and because there's nothing for it to see, so it just gets bigger and bigger, and then it reverses on itself and dissolves into its own source. And so then you get self-realization, which isn't the realization of God as, God's, the mind of God, the infinite light, that happened in the fifth dimension. It's the dissolving into nothing. So that's why, even some of our teachings, that's why the Buddhists say there is no God. Or in one of Yoga Swami's quotes, he'll say, everything is God, this and that, and then he'll say, there is no God, there's no you, there's no I, there's nothing. That's what he's talking about. And so the seventh dimension and self-realization are protected things within the inner being, because most people are a little bit afraid to become nothing. So, those are the seven dimensions. You can tell it's kind of a large study that could use some extra reading, maybe a couple of years of meditation on it. Another thing to understand in these teachings is the five states of the mind. So, seven dimensions of the mind, and then these five states. These ones are a little more easy because a lot of us are used to Western psychology, and some of them show up there. The first is, of course, our conscious mind. That one's pretty simple. That's us in our daily life. Our emotions, our intellect. What we're doing right now is a very conscious mind. And then we have our subconscious mind. And that we all know too. That's our storehouse of our experiences. It's this cumulative impressions of our life. And as Gurudeva puts it well, it's something you can kind of mold like clay over time. So if you have bad impressions about something, I don't like that. Maybe because of something you experienced as a child, and then you realize as an adult, I don't have to not like that. It's maybe not effective to not like something. So then that subconscious has another couple states of mind that are a good thing to reflect on. So one is the subconscious, and that is the impressions that multiple impressions have gone in the subconscious mind and have left another impression that is not something you intellectually ferret out. So if the good example from the Master Course Trilogy is somebody who, every time they go to a public event, something bad happens to them or something embarrassing happens to another person. Their core, their third chakra, willpower tightens up, and they get very on edge. And so then maybe that happened 6 times, and then now every time they go to a social event, that happens automatically. For a lot of people, that's just getting up and talking in front of people. That happens. So That's the subconscious mind, and that's just a useful thing to know about or to reflect on for our own, how to unraveling our who we think we are a little bit, so we can get closer to our own self. But then we have the superconscious mind and the superconscious mind. In this instance, the superconscious mind is the mind of light, the mind of the soul, the part of us that's issuing forth from our own deeper perfection and our oneness with everything. And it's kind of an easy way to identify parts of it as your own, the best qualities about you, your love, your inspiration, all those things are coming from the superconscious mind. It has an interesting way of reaching you sometimes, and that is through the superconscious mind. So in this way, we're saying if you take your subconscious mind and if you purify it through religious activities or through being just generally trying to follow the religious guidelines like nonviolence, trying to be a good person, resolving your karma, not getting emotional all the time, eventually you can work your subconscious mind into a somewhat quiescent, peaceful state. And the more you do that, the more your intuition, which comes from your superconscious mind, can flow through your subconscious, and then you have a superconscious mind that you're talking about. So, some ways that shows up for people in our modern age is the term flow. You've heard flow, right? So that's actually a utilization of the superconscious mind. For Olympic athletes, for instance, they train them to feel like they're going to be successful. And most of them say, when they got their gold medals, they were just in this state where they just knew they were going to win, right? They were using that subconscious mind. So, that's the 5 states of mind. Another study for further inquiry. And then, real quickly, we have 2 more terms here that Gurudeva uses often in his earlier teachings, which is odic force and actinic force. Put briefly, actinic force is the spiritual force, the superconscious mind, your intuition. And then odic force is the magnetic forces that hold together the world. They can be either things that attract us to things or repel us from things. The good thing here is mentioned odic force is a magnetic, sticky, binding substance that people seek to develop when they want to bind themselves together, such as a partnership, marriage, guru-shishya relationship, or friendship. So odic force is just magnetism. Okay. So, now we actually come to the letter that Gurudeva wrote back in the 70s. Okay, this is called force fields. And it's you have to understand, it's a fairly mystical way of looking at the mind. It's not just looking at it from the outside. So, this first sentence, okay, everything of form that's of the mind, of this big mind that our awareness is experiencing, everything of form spins. Thus, magnetic force, odic force, as a substance, spins into a pattern or a field of force. The velocity of this spinning motion indicates its intensity or its interaction. To keep the odic force field spinning is the art of good management, or to keep a odic force field spinning. When an odic force field spins clockwise, that is, if you were mystically looking down upon it, it would be spinning like a phonograph record. The energy from an odic force spinning in this way will be shedding itself out into the world. When the odic force field is spinning counterclockwise, the substance becomes passive and magnetic, of a darker and depressed atmosphere. So the more the forces within the field are spinning actinically, or spiritually, the faster they spin, the more loving and sharing or giving that force field is. The faster it spins clockwise. The more depressed, self-centered, greedy, the more and more faster it's spinning counterclockwise. So, one thing that's nice to point out is that we walk around the temple clockwise. And if you were to speed that up and see 20 years in 10 seconds, you see a spinning vortex counterclockwise. So when the odic force field is spinning counterclockwise, so you can well imagine a city of different forces involved, and why the path of the sannyasins is to leave the city and be in the odic forces of nature, which are less detrimental to the unfoldment of superconsciousness. So we were just at a garden today, and it's a lot less jarring than being in the middle of a city, where everybody's creating their own fields of energy, and sometimes they're clashing with each other. It's a lot easier to go within yourself and be quiet if the nature around you is like that already. We create odic force fields through our chakras. The spinning of the chakra, either clockwise or counterclockwise, are troughs of energy. So clockwise being that our upper 7 chakras spin clockwise, and our lower 7 chakras spin counterclockwise. And those are fear, anger, jealousy, etc., etc. Finally, some of the odic force from this spinning from the chakras exudes out. The energy from the chakras fills the room. When a group of people get together, the collective forces thrown out from the chakras adds more odic force to the room. Finally, some of this odic force exudes out around the house or temple. Should a lot of activity among people occur, or should a lot of energy get catalyzed through the chakras, a magnitude of collective particles form around the exterior of this field of force, thus creating a shield that other force fields of unlike vibration cannot enter. So this is a fascinating thing. So we did an article for Hinduism Today where we had interviewed a priest in Bali, and we did an article about Bali. But this high priest, he said, the reason our island hasn't had any detrimental natural disasters and our religion is strong, or that other religions haven't come in and diluted it, is because everyone on the island is living an active religious life and creating a force field around the island with their spiritual life. So that concept can also be seen if you've ever been to Kauai, for example. I like to use that example because anyone that's walked through the front gate, sometimes they instantly feel like they've walked through a field. Basically, wow, it suddenly feels like India, or it suddenly feels like some deep spiritual place, and you feel like going within yourself. And that's the vibration, that's the force field that the monks, the monastics are creating, and the temple is creating. Just our daily sadhana, our daily meditations, disciplining ourselves. The more you discipline yourself, the more people around you are inspired to discipline themselves. And so that creates this really high vibration, and it creates a bubble. Because once you get to just outside that vibration, you drop gears really fast into this relaxed Kauai life in our case. And that sudden change of vibration, of pitch, creates a field that thought forms, for instance, can't pass through very easily. And even people. We get some kind of weird people around the edge of that field, but they don't often come into the monastery. Some of them just don't feel like it. There was a British colonel in South India, and it was kind of his job to kind of tamp down Hinduism a little bit. And there was this one temple that he said in his writings, he said, I was supposed to go in there and kind of tell the priests what to do and all that, but I was just scared to death to enter that temple. So that's maybe a little bit of guardian Davis also. Another example of that, Gurudeva mentions in the master courses as a group of people that create a force field, just by their only letting in certain caliber of people. So you'll have maybe an artistic community that only artists in, or a group of bankers that are really good at what they do. And the minute they start letting in people into their group and associating with people that maybe are kind of a lower caliber, then they damage their force field. So, force fields being created by humans do not always last. Hence the rise and fall of empires, the success and failure of business. Those who have mastered through knowledge the control of odic force can naturally make their odic force fields last longer than others. Hence the perpetuation of empires through the monarchy system, but the rise and fall of dictatorships can be exceedingly short, only lengthened depending on the knowledge the dictator would have in the acquisition, control, and perpetuation of the short-term force field. So things created quickly often dissolve quickly. Good example is the piece of IKEA furniture that you buy and you assemble in maybe 30 minutes, and then it's probably going to last 10 years max, right? But if you have some woodworker 150 years ago that pours his heart into spending months picking out the right wood, carving it, making the finish just right, and then he makes this beautiful cabinet, and you can still find it today because it hasn't dissolved. It's been taken care of as well by other people who've acquired it, because so much energy was put into the creation of it. So that's a good key for force fields, for creating them for yourself. Force fields are often taken away from one person and given to another. Hence promotion in management, or the limited political terms in the United States. So it would seem that for those dealing in force fields, rather than in merchandise or physical things, they're kind of a new type of toy or thing to play with for some people. It's another thing to acquire, right? People of vision that make the decisions that structure the force fields, that structure the forces within a field. People of vision make the decisions that structure the forces within a field. A board of regents at a university would make the decisions for thousands of students, thus structuring the mechanism within the field. And they would actually decide how long the students would go to school and what they should learn. Their decisions would structure a mechanism so great that it would control the intellectual philosophies and mind structure of a state or nation. In this way, you can see how the focal point of a force field can come to the voice of just one person at its center. Gurudev was a good example of that because, in creating Kauai, his monastic order, he was really instrumental in creating this massive moving field around himself, and then passing that field on to his successor. So Gurudeva gives us some tips for how to create a positive field in your own home, field of energy. Good thoughts is the first one. So, mystically speaking, thoughts can be seen psychically and in form. They do create form. So they can even stick to places where stick to walls that don't get cleaned very often. They can just accrue. And so if you're somebody who thinks some good thoughts, some bad thoughts, then that's kind of the field you're building over time. If you work tirelessly to create good thoughts, you're also creating an attitude and energy of self-control, right? So that's another field you're creating, which is good. So number 2, Gurudeva says here, is cleanliness, because cleaning the physical world can actually help clean these energies. And then he gives 2 more which are actually connected. So one, he says you need all the elements there, earth, air, fire, water, solid, liquid, gas, combustion. And then the last one, he says actinic love, which actinic love is, again, energies coming from the 5th chakra. So another aspect to that is also mantra. So there's another definition of akasha, which I really like, which is sound, vibration. So an element, it's the vibration through the other elements, through the other states of matter. So, puja, for instance, you have passed down in our tradition all these really powerful sounds that create a deeper vibration that connect to deeper states of consciousness. So that's one way that obviously the temples build strong actinic fields. Okay, so dealing with forces as we are every day in our lives. When we have an actinic consciousness, we are able to flow through, understand, but not be identified with the odic force fields of the world. So that sounds a lot like our third and fourth dimensional talk. We're able to interact with the third dimension without getting too attached to it. Often it is the case also that when everybody is doing the same thing, this creates an odic force field. So it is not that the thing people are doing is so attractive. The object is everybody is doing the same thing together. This creates a very magnetic odic force field. So you see this in like herd mentality. There's enough people doing something and everybody thinks it's right. Thus, we must be very careful not to get caught up in odic force swirls. Different thoughts, things people do, are neither good nor bad, but the group activity creating this moving force field could inhibit our unfoldment if not directed towards yogic ends, because odic forces become mixed within your practice. Of course, should another odic force be injected into the group's force field of a mass movement, for instance, the repercussions will be felt by everybody. So what that means is basically that right now we're creating a spiritual field of our thoughts and our energy. And if we were to take one of the two massive political force fields in the United States and mention something from one of them into this field that we are creating, then it would instantly, because these two fields are spinning against each other, it would instantly bring in the conflict of those two large, powerful fields into this space, which would be upsetting into the nervous system and the mood field. Right? So that's those two fields are a good example because it's a lot of people in each of those fields, and the magnetism created from that is exactly what he's talking about. Enough people doing the same thing. So when you're thinking about something, if you're thinking about politics, you're putting your awareness into that large magnetic field that's moving, and it could actually move you to think and feel a certain way that you wouldn't normally if you weren't connecting yourself to that large field. So you have to be very careful with large movements, how much awareness you give them, because they're actually affecting you more than you realize. It's kind of like stepping into a really powerful river. It can kind of sweep you away. It's also present in people who create large force fields around themselves, but they don't properly know how to handle them. So a rock star is a good example. Somebody who, they get very popular very fast, and the amount of people around them creates this huge field, and then they can't handle all the awareness of those people on them, and then they lose balance and turn to drugs and have usually a pretty bad time eventually. If all those movies I see are true. So, you may have come away from an odic force field situation, re-entered your home, and have felt sticky inside, sort of unclean. And in taking a shower, readjusted all of your odic force, washed off and out of your aura the odic force fields that you had picked up from the unhealthy odic situation you had come from, and you felt like yourself again. This works quite the same in reverse. Being in a good situation, picking up a good positive odic force field, being inspired by a temple, for instance, or being inspired by a lecture, you go into your home and immediately your presence there begins to change the atmosphere of your home. You are a catalyst for the forces you walk into, but unless you can put the power of your soul into the odic forces and keep them going, they wear away after a short time. The other positive thing about using this spiritual power that you awaken in yourself through quieting your mind, through meditation, is that it allows you to continue to change the magnetic forces in your life. So you keep them in a churning state, like magma. You're keeping the rocks and keeping them moving. And that's what allows you to grow and evolve faster. Not that we're in a rush necessarily, but it's useful not to get stuck into one place. To keep working these energies into your life, and that's why it's great to go to the temple. That's why it's great to do puja or prayer or ideally meditation as well. All these things are just to help you continue to move the auric forces of your life, and eventually that will kind of open the way for your own awareness to turn in on itself and go deeper within yourself. So, this last quote from Gurudeva. I've just presented several steps or ideas of the deeper occult laws that you can put into use. Meditate on them and try to see them as I see them. The force fields of nature and the force fields on this planet.